Welcome to JS on Politics. I'm your host, Greg Borowski, and believe it or not, it's kind of a quiet day on the campaign trail here in Wisconsin today, but that will change soon enough. But it gives us a chance to catch up with what's been happening and set the stage for next week. Here's a look at what's ahead on our show today. We'll start with a look at the GOP side of the equation, where Ted Cruz got a boost and Donald Trump is not faring so well in Wisconsin this week. Then we'll talk numbers with Craig Gilbert, our Washington bureau chief, and take a look at the Democratic side, where Bernie Sanders may be poised to give Hillary Clinton another loss. We'll take a quick look at the candidates on the Truthometer, then look at some of the other races on the ballot, and finally, as always, we'll take some viewer questions. But let's get started with some of the reporters who've been chasing the candidates around the state this week. We're joined by Mary Spicuzza, Bill Glauber, and from Madison, Patrick Marley. And let's give the top line numbers first on the Republican side, because a big development was the Marquette Law School poll, which was released this week, well anticipated by all the candidates and observers, and it showed that Ted Cruz was in the lead with 40%, followed by Donald Trump with 30%, John Kasich with 21%, and don't know undecided were about 8%. So Mary, let's start with you. That's obviously not good numbers for Trump. He's been kind of stuck at that 30% level. Big jump for Ted Cruz. Mm-hmm. But talk about Donald Trump's week this week. It hasn't been the best for him in terms of how he's faring here in Wisconsin.
Right. So he started off, he called into conservative talk radio on Monday, starting with Charlie Sykes, and really got hammered. A lot of, pretty much every conservative talk radio host in the state is a never Trump person, has been very vocally critical of him. He called in seeming to not know that or not have been told that, and seemed kind of caught off guard by how harsh of criticism he was taking. He took a lot of criticism for his comments about Heidi Cruz and other women. A lot of them are never Trump people and told him they're never Trump people. And he, at one point, I think he told Jerry Bader, I'm surprised you wouldn't be impartial since you're a reporter. And then he did a town hall. He's been traveling the state. We got to go and ask him some questions on his plane the other day. He did a town hall in Green Bay yesterday where he had to walk back some comments he made about punishing women who have abortions, or if it's made illegal that women should be punished if they have abortions. So his campaign quickly issued a statement trying to walk that back, but it hasn't been the smoothest week for the
so
Donalds.
To get your sense about Trump has been a bit of a juggernaut over time, but not so much here in Wisconsin. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's three people who are running anti-Scott Walker campaigns here in Wisconsin. A little bit Hillary Clinton, a lot Bernie Sanders, and a real lot Donald Trump. He is running against the Republican establishment. He was very harsh about Governor Scott Walker. That doesn't play well in southeastern Wisconsin among Republicans. It might play a little bit better up north. He just has seemed to be caught off guard by Wisconsin, doesn't really get it. Has a few days to recover, but he's down 10 points, and if he slips further back, it's possible that he doesn't gain any delegates out of here, although he should do well up north in some of those northern congressional districts.
Right. It'll be interesting to see how much more time he puts into Wisconsin if he moves on to some of the other states and sort of says he's not going to do as well here. Patrick, let me ask you though, on Ted Cruz has enjoyed a rise here in the state. Is that more because he's sort of the main option left, or is there some affinity we're developing here in Wisconsin for Ted Cruz because he wasn't that popular, just a few months back?
Yeah, I think that what's contributing to Trump's problem is that when he started out, the field was huge. I think there were 17 when the race first started. Obviously, it narrowed a little bit before Iowa. But when Trump was getting 30% or in the 30s at that point, that was the most of any candidate. Now we're seeing, it looks like in Wisconsin, that his ceiling may be that 30% as well. And so Cruz was able to make up tremendous ground. I think Rubio dropping out really helped Cruz. This Stop Trump movement, at least in Wisconsin, has really coalesced around Cruz, and that appears to be the case nationally. So it's to his tremendous benefit.
Yeah, are you guys sensing, Mary, any particular enthusiasm for Ted Cruz, though? Because it seems to be a matter of convenience that he's the one who's left, right? Who's the best place to stop Trump. So is it stop Trump or we like Ted Cruz here?
I think it's a little of both. On Friday, I went to some of his events that he had up in Oshkosh and Green Bay, and there were people I talked to who were Cruz supporters since the beginning. They didn't switch as people dropped out of the race. They said that they liked that he was a constitutional conservative. However, I would say that's probably the minority, and it seems like a lot of voters I've talked to supported one or two candidates who have since gotten out of the race, and they see him as not Donald Trump.
Well, you just simply add the math of the Marquette polls. Rubio dropped out, and Ben Carson dropped out. That was about 28% of the polls at that time, and then, Cruz doubled his amount. So he's really, it appears to be a second or third choice candidate, but he's the best candidate the anti-Trumps have. At least that's who they think they have, even though the guy who does best against Democrats in a theoretical matchup is Ohio Governor John Kasich.
Yeah, well, let's talk about John Kasich a little bit. He saw a bit of a surge in the poll, too. I mean, he's up to 20+%, right? Do you see a chance that he could get ahead of Trump, or is he sort of locked in third here in Wisconsin?
Well, it appears his strategy is to try to, peel off some delegates out of the congressional district out of Madison, which, obviously is a very Democratic district in a normal race, but this is a Republican primary. So he's hoping to peel off some voters there, but I don't yet sense that he's going for number 2 here, but that could change, as they look at their internal polls.
All right, and Patrick, let me ask you briefly, we had the endorsement, not unexpected, of Scott Walker for Ted Cruz. How much do you think that helps Ted Cruz in the primary?
Oh, I think that helps a lot. I mean, the governor's very popular among Republicans. It's just kind of an ad for him. He says he's going to be campaigning for him. That's not what is putting Cruz in the place that he's at right now, but it's another piece that helps him. I think it's his benefit.
All right, we're going to take a quick look at kind of a deeper dive into the numbers now with this taped segment with Craig Gilbert, our Washington bureau chief. We're joined now by Craig Gilbert, our Washington bureau chief. And Craig, you're kind of a numbers geek, so let's dig into these numbers from the Marquette poll yesterday.
Sure.
Aside from the top line horse race numbers, what was surprising or striking to you about some of the poll numbers?
Well, Donald Trump, it's not a shock that he's got high negatives. He's had high negatives for a long time in Wisconsin. They're getting a little worse. I mean, if you look at his numbers among Republican voters in Wisconsin going back to January and February, his negatives have gone from the mid-30s to the mid-40s to up to 50%. So that's obviously not a good sign
trend
for him. No. And his numbers in the general election scenarios are pretty bad. On the Democratic side, it's not a lot of change. It's kind of what we thought, a very competitive race.
All right, now talk a little bit about, if you could, about Scott Walker's approval ratings. Those were inching up a little bit,
Yep.
and how that may affect, Ted Cruz and those supporters.
Right. So it doesn't hurt Ted Cruz or Governor Walker that, his numbers are creeping back after hitting a low this fall in the high 30s among all voters in Wisconsin. Now they're in the low 40s. They've remained pretty high among Republican voters. He's in the 80s, depending on how you count them, 70s or 80s, in positive ratings from Republican voters. So that's helpful to Ted Cruz. It doesn't help Donald Trump, who's ripping the governor in Wisconsin, kind of an unconventional strategy, telling Republican voters that the Republican governor is screwing up in their state after all the wars they've gone through. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and just to note for our viewers, the poll came out, was taken after Scott Walker's endorsement of Ted Cruz, so that doesn't factor into
the poll was taken,
right,
yes,
it was before the
endorsement,
yeah.
yes.
Okay. So there was an interesting question in the poll, I thought, about which candidate would you feel very uncomfortable
Right.
about being president, and Donald Trump led that with 55%. Hillary Clinton had 47%, seemed
Right.
very uncomfortable. Cruz and Sanders were 37 and 36. So John Kasich is 10%. So he's sort of leading that category, but the one has no mathematical chance of getting the
Right.
nomination.
And the really funny thing is that Democratic voters have less discomfort with John Kasich as president who's a Republican, than Republicans do with Donald Trump, their Republican frontrunner. So that just tells you how scrambled this race is.
Let's talk a little bit about the geographic divides and things in the state, because it's kind of an interesting split, too, particularly on the Republican side. But where are these candidates drawing their most support?
Yeah, so it's proportional. It's by congressional district in both parties, so the map really matters. And obviously on the Republican side, we've talked about how Donald Trump is better in the north. There's 3 congressional districts, the 3rd, the 7th, the 8th. It's basically the northern Wisconsin, western Wisconsin, where he has a chance to win those districts even if he loses statewide. But he's terribly unpopular in the southeast, where more voters and more people are. John Kasich has a chance, according to the poll, to win the congressional district around Madison. Again, this is with Republican and independent voters in a Democratic district. Maybe the Milwaukee congressional district, too, the urban one. We don't know. And Ted Cruz certainly looks good in southeastern Wisconsin. On the Democratic side, I mean, in the Republican suburbs, on the Democratic side, the Democrats give a bonus to congressional districts that are more Democratic. So the district with the most delegates is the one around Madison, where Bernie Sanders is very strong. That could help him. But real battlegrounds in the north, for example, and the more rural parts of Wisconsin between Sanders and Clinton.
All right, lastly, let me ask, what specifically you'll be looking for on Tuesday night as the results come in? Is it turnout in certain areas,
Right.
or what will be the sort of the tell in terms of the final result?
Well, the state election officials have forecast a pretty robust turnout, and if we get a turnout like that, it's going to be really interesting to see if that, means that on the Republican side, that these suburban counties in southeastern Wisconsin are even more influential than they are in your typical Republican primary, which is a lot, or does it mean that the turnout is high in other places too? And if it's high in the north and the west, that could help Donald Trump narrow that lead that we've seen Ted Cruz carve out. On the Democratic side, those turnouts will matter for delegate allocation. I mean, if the turnouts are if Bernie Sanders people turn out and he can run up the score in some of his core areas of strength, that helps him creep a little bit closer to Hillary Clinton in the delegate chase.
All right, well, we'll leave that discussion there for today. You can follow Craig's coverage at jsonline.com in the coming days and even beyond as the presidential campaign continues. All right, we're back live now with our panel. I want to talk about the Democratic side of the ticket, where there's another, hotly contested race going on. So let's first look at the Marquette Law School numbers for the Democrats. And in that poll this week, it showed Bernie Sanders at 49%, Hillary Clinton at 45%, with 6% don't know or undecided. And then we'll take a look at some head-to-head matchups with assuming that Donald Trump is the nominee on the Republican side, Hillary Clinton tops some 47% to 37% in Wisconsin. Bernie Sanders has a bit of a larger margin, 54% to 35% in the state. Now, Bill, you covered the poll results as they came out. Talk a little bit about Bernie Sanders and he's been creeping up on Hillary over time.
He has
and
been
is now
creeping
ahead.
up and is now ahead. He was down 20 here several months ago. Now he's up 4. I think the most startling number in the poll was that Bernie Sanders was so strong among the age group 18 to 29, sort of like a 70-point advantage for him. Hillary Clinton stronger with older voters. They were even basically in the Milwaukee area, which was a bit of a surprise. Sanders a little bit ahead among men, about tied among women. So it's an interesting poll. He has really surged here, and he is really working it. I mean,
Are those votes, the more reliable turnout ones, usually the older voters? Can Bernie Sanders count on those supporters getting to the polls on Tuesday, do you think? Or
we'll see. I mean, they're talking about a high turnout of over 40%. If that's the case, then yes, some of those younger voters will get to the polls. He is speaking to their issues, especially around college affordability. A lot of people in that age group are carrying a lot of college debt. Clinton is trying to appeal to that too. I saw her at a rally in Milwaukee in Sherman Park Boys and Girls Club. I thought live she was more impressive than you see on television. She seemed to connect to the crowd, but a much smaller crowd. Sanders is drawing thousands. Clinton is drawing hundreds.
Yeah, Patrick, and one of the spots where Sanders expects to do well, of course, is Dane County and Madison with the college students there and the very liberal base. What's your sense there in terms of how well he'll do in getting the vote out? I mean, it's one thing in November if you're Barack Obama to get people out on April 5th here for a primary. Is the turnout as something he can count on there?
Oh, I think he can definitely count on a very high turnout in Madison. Madison consistently has really big turnout. It did in the February primary, which was, for state Supreme Court, and that was pretty low interest generally. So I think he'll have a lot of support on the college campus, but also just in Madison generally. It's the most liberal part of the state. And those voters really like Bernie Sanders. He's got this very long tradition of sort of championing issues that are important to them, whether it's this free college issue or universal health care. That really taps into and the other thing is those voters are just incredibly enthusiastic, as shown by the thousands and thousands of people who are coming to his events in Wisconsin.
All right, Mary, let me ask you this question on Hillary Clinton is clearly spending a lot of time in Wisconsin. She'll be back again this weekend. But is she playing it a little safe here? Because she's got the delegate lead. Everyone figures she's going to keep that delegate lead. She's got the superdelegates, but it doesn't help her to lose states. She lost several on Saturday. She might lose Wisconsin on Tuesday. Has that become a problem for her?
I think it does, although I think she's starting to set her sights to the East Coast at this point and thinking what would be worse, losing Wisconsin or losing someplace like New York. So I think that she, obviously wants to win here and is banking on African Americans backing her, hoping to do well in Milwaukee. But I don't know, does she even think she would have a chance at beating Bernie in Madison? I don't think she should think that she would have a chance. So I don't see her booking a bunch of Madison rallies at this point.
It's been a tough state for her. I mean, she lost by 17 points to Obama in 2008. You know, one thing that nobody mentioned in the poll or got sort of a short shrift was Obama's popularity, his job approvals, over 50%. So, you know, you're looking at the primary now, but if you take it out a few months to the general election, I mean, that would be good news for Democrats. The other thing I found interesting is if it really is a tight race between Sanders and Clinton, will that drive up turnout for Democrats who presumably would be then voting in the state Supreme Court race? And also, is there an effect with the Democratic vote in Milwaukee, in the Milwaukee County executive race, where the Larson forces are explicitly or not so explicitly working with Sanders, you know, the third party group? So I think the Democratic race, even though it's been overshadowed, is fascinating.
Yeah, Patrick, let me ask you this question, because most of the discussion in recent weeks has been, you know, can the Republicans unite behind Trump or Cruz, and so divisive? But the Democrats have a very feisty, ongoing battle here with a lot of similar, you know, fault lines and things. Do you think the Democrats will be able to unite enough behind, say, if it is Hillary Clinton, who a lot of people aren't very enthusiastic about?
Yeah, I think they will. I mean, I think that Hillary Clinton has some enthusiasm problems among Democrats generally, but their debate has really been pretty policy focused. You're not seeing the kind of fractures that you're seeing on the Republican side. So I think the Democrats will have a much easier time uniting than the Republicans will. They look to have some very serious challenges.
What do you guys think here? I mean, if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, and it's been interesting, a lot of the young folks, including young women who you might expect in some cases to be pro-Hillary, I mean, can they get excited about Hillary Clinton?
Well, it may not be that they get excited about Hillary Clinton, but what's the alternative in a Republican Party that has moved further and further and further to the right? You know, if Ted Cruz should be the nominee of the party over Donald Trump, that's the furthest right candidate, I think, who's ever run for president on a national party. If it's Trump, you know, he's got his problems. If they go to a brokered convention and come up with somebody else, such as the man running the stealth presidential campaign, Paul Ryan, you know, then that's a totally different thing. But I think that the Democrats seemingly would be united against the Republican nominee.
All right, we'll leave that discussion there and go now to this tape segment looking at how the candidates have been faring on the Truth-O-Meter. We're joined now by Tom Kircher, a PolitiFact Wisconsin reporter, to talk about how the presidential candidates are faring on the Truth-O-Meter. So, Tom, we're going to start with the Republicans and kind of whip through some of these. So let's start with Donald Trump, whose claim we looked at was Wisconsin's effective unemployment rate is 20%. And we rated that false.
The unemployment rate that people normally think about is only about 4.6% in Wisconsin. There is a larger measure, 8.3%, that includes discouraged workers, but nowhere near the 20% that Trump said.
All right. And another claim from Donald Trump was, I'm self-funding my own campaign, and that was rated half true.
He's put roughly more than half of his own money into the campaign, but some of that's loans that he could potentially get back, and he also gets quite a bit of contributions from individuals.
All right, let's look at Ted Cruz, who claimed here that Donald Trump has received $2 billion in free media, and that was rated mostly true.
Yeah, we've actually rated a similar claim by John Kasich, who said the figure was $1.8 billion. It's based on an estimate on a market analysis, so it's not entirely firm, but we rated it mostly true.
All right, and another Ted Cruz statement that Barack Obama won't say the phrase radical Islamic terrorism, and that was rated true.
When we last checked on that, you know, we certainly can't be aware of all statements that may have been made in private, but in terms of public statements, the Obama administration has not used that phrase in terms of combating terrorism.
All right, and our third Republican, John Kasich, who has a claim, I beat Hillary Clinton by more than anybody by 11 points. He's referring, of course, to the polls, and that was rated mostly true.
Yeah, in the polls, general election matchup, Kasich versus Clinton. Kasich's right, he defeats her in the polls, but the saying that he beats her by 11 points is a bit of an outlier. Some of the polls are quite a bit closer than that.
All right, and another John Kasich claim, 20 million Americans are out of work, and that was rated half true.
The estimate he relied on was not meant to put a firm figure on it. It was a ballpark. So for him to state 20 million as fact was going too far.
All right, let's shift to the Democratic side. First with Hillary Clinton, who has a claim here. Our economy does better when we have a Democrat in the White House, and that claim was rated mostly true.
There are different measures, of course, for the economy. One of them would be the stock market, and going back several decades, the stock market has, in fact, fared better when Democrats are in the White House.
Okay, and another claim from Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders voted against the Brady Bill 5 times, and that was rated true.
So the Brady Bill goes back to 1983. It requires a waiting period for gun purchases. And when Sanders was a congressman, he did vote against it 5 times.
All right, and finally, Bernie Sanders, the other Democrat who left in the race, the quote is the top 1/10 of 1% of Americans now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%, and that was rated mostly true.
Yeah, Sanders actually made this claim back in last summer when he was in Madison campaigning. We rated it mostly true because the numbers are borne out, except for the fact that the study he relied on didn't include Social Security in terms of people's wealth.
All right, and finally, another Bernie Sanders claim. America has more people in jail than any country on earth, and that was rated mostly true.
He's essentially on target with that as well. The one caveat there is that for China, there's an unknown number of people held in detention centers.
All right, so we'll leave that there for this segment today. Please follow PolitiFactWisconsin.com for more updates and more Truth-O-Meter checks as the campaign winds down. Thanks, Tom.
You bet.
All right, we're back live, and as you can see, we've changed panels here. We have Dan Bice, Watchdog columnist, David Haynes, our Editorial Page editor. We do our little requisite Editorial Page, news side, totally different, totally separate. I've never met this man before today.
Try to influence me at all.
We don't talk to one another, except for now.
Yeah,
Dave, right?
Dan, Dave, you know, we're all new here. Okay, so Dave, this week you guys had a very busy week on the Editorial Page. You've been very critical of Donald Trump. You endorsed John Kasich, not so happy with Hillary Clinton and openness. What's the reaction from readers, Ben, and talk a little bit about why you made those picks?
Well, we've had a strong reaction from readers overall to what we've done. We took Donald Trump to the woodshed for basically being Donald Trump. And we endorsed Kasich, which is out of practice for us. We, 4 years ago, decided as a default position not to do recommendations. Because I thought that harmed our independence. We like to be an honest broker of opinion from all sides of the political spectrum. But decided in this, frankly, crazy Republican race, we had to take a stand. We like Kasich because while he's conservative on any number of issues, no one can say he's not. He was Newt Gingrich's right-hand man when he was in Congress. But he's also independent. He's willing to think independently, in our view. On Hillary, we just have a real problem with her secrecy. And the Obama administration has been one of the most secretive administrations we've ever had, and we see nothing in Hillary Clinton's record, to indicate that her administration would be any different. So we wanted to call that to the attention of readers in Wisconsin.
All right, and Dan, you hear more from the campaigns and things. Do they worry about these things anymore, battle for these endorsements?
Sure.
You know, I know Kasich mentioned it in his town hall at least twice that he got the endorsement of
Sure. I think especially in the races where it's close, it matters a great deal as to whether they'll be getting endorsements. I've gotten calls from several campaigns this week saying, when are we going to be called in to be asked if they're going to endorse us or not? So I've tried to explain our default position, but frankly, I don't know. Are we going to endorse county exec or mayor's race?
Well, and that's an open question yet. We're still considering whether to do recommendations on the Democratic side for president. We have Senator Sanders coming in tomorrow afternoon, so we'll talk after that. I think it's frankly unlikely we would, but we're open-minded on it. And we're still considering whether to do recommendations in the county executive's race and the mayor's race. And that's something that we'll have to figure out. How long do we have? 48 hours?
A little more than 48 hours.
72.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of those local races, because I think they're still quite interesting. They're getting really overshadowed by the presidential campaign. The county executive's race may be the closest one on the ballot.
From what I hear from all the polling going on, it's neck and neck. And, it was in the primary a neck and neck race. I think turnout will be a big factor. You can see how important the race is and how close it is by mailers that Chris Abeley's sending out just recently. They're called social pressure mailers. They're intended to shame people into going out and vote. They give your voting record and then explain how 7 of your neighbors have voted or didn't vote in the 2008-2012 general elections. Some people don't like them. I've gotten calls from several people who don't like them, but I'm told that in general they tend to work.
Well, what's funny is we got one at our house, and as
Right.
my wife said, I don't know any of these people because it's not your immediate neighbors. It's like they want to do the social pressure, but not avoid that problem that people have run into when it's your immediate neighbors. I think a few years ago it was your immediate neighbor.
It was, and you know, Ted Cruz got into some trouble by sending by sending out this thing that said voter violation, saying you haven't voted enough. In these cases, it tends to be people, from what I've heard so far, people who have voted regularly in the past, and it's an attempt to make sure that they come out this time. But turnout's important, and that's why these things are going out.
Yeah, well, it seems if Chris Larson is able to win, one thing that would be interesting is that for the first time in probably a decade, it would change that dynamic. We've become so familiar with the board and the executive at odds with each other because he's got to be a lot more in line with the county board than Chris Abele is and Scott Walker.
But you still
was.
have the sheriff out there, so they could actually get into a fight with him. But you know, there's also the issue of spending. The most recent report shows Abele spent $3.5 million so far, Larson at $200,000. So the gap between the two, and it's just going to get greater between now and Election Day.
Well, the top of the ticket's going to matter in that race, right?
It will.
Turnout on the Democratic side, particularly for Sanders, who is leading now, according to the Marquette University Law School poll, could matter for Larson.
Oh, sure, it could. But at the same time, there have been mailers that Abele has sent out saying Chris Larson is no Bernie Sanders. So
he's even got the little haircut deal with it,
right,
too.
Can I ask you a question? Do the mailers, the shaming mailers, do those work?
According to the Abele people, they do, and they're becoming more and more popular.
Okay.
But I think they really irritate a few people. But I think that other people are, somewhat competitive. They don't want to get a mailer next time that says I didn't vote next time in the last election.
Okay.
All right, let's talk briefly about the mayor's race. Is there any reason to think that it's not going to be Tom Barrett celebrating another term come Tuesday?
From what I'm hearing from the polling being done in the city and around the city, that he's opened up a really wide gap with Bob Donovan. Bob Donovan has 2 radio ads. I don't hear them very much. They sound like they were cut in his basement on a Saturday night, whereas
late on a Saturday night.
From what I understand in the polling, Bob Donovan will do very well with one group of people, and that's males between the ages of 35 and 50. He should win that category, but the mayor will probably win almost everything else. The talk is that he'll get between 55 and 60% of the vote, I believe.
All right, let's take a few viewer questions here. The first one I'm going to throw to Dave, because I might put him on the spot a little bit. It's from E.H. Hunt, who says, does a vote for John Kasich really equate to a vote for Donald Trump as it cuts into Ted Cruz's potential margin of victory in Wisconsin? And I'm asking you because you guys are saying vote for John Kasich, but you're also saying don't vote for Donald Trump. So is that causing problems?
Right. Yeah. And our theory on it is that actually Ted Cruz is more of the problem as the race moves out of Wisconsin and toward the east, where Kasich should be stronger. In fact, if you look at some of the polling, the second choice of Trump voters is John Kasich, not Ted Cruz. So I guess I would ask the viewer, who really is the spoiler here? I would argue it's Ted Cruz going forward.
Kasich did say in your editorial board meeting that he does not expect to win here, correct?
He did. He thinks he will do well in certain congressional districts and get some delegates, but he doesn't expect to win.
We're going to quickly try to run through a couple more here. So that for Dan, this is of your name, Jenny, says, if Hillary needs the superdelegates to win, won't that mean riots in the streets of the Democratic convention? Is she going to make it without, or going to need the superdelegates? What do you think?
One interesting thing in that poll yesterday was 77% of the voters, even though Sanders won that, expect Hillary Clinton to win. So I don't expect riots. I think there's a general belief and consensus within the Democratic Party that Clinton is going to win, and so if that expectation wasn't there, then it would be a completely different outcome.
All right, and this one's for Dave, kind of a cheeky question from Jane Doe, who says, does it bother you that the candidates you endorse always seem to lose?
Well, there is talk in the street that our endorsement is popular with the other side often, but no, you know what we try to do when we do recommendations, and again, we rarely do them, but when we do them, is we try to just stand on the principles that we believe in and go from there.
All right, Dan and I last week got Notre Dame right over Wisconsin. Who's your pick to win Monday night, NCAA?
Let's see. Who's playing again?
Come on, guys. Villanova's playing, Oklahoma, North Carolina.
I'm actually picking North Carolina. They beat my Hoosiers, so I've got to go with them.
I think North Carolina looks the strongest, but I like Villanova. They've been a strong team and been shooting very well.
I'm going to go with the Big East. I'm a Marquette guy, so I'm going to stick with the conference for Villanova.
Right.
So that's where we're going to end it today. We'll check next week how we did on that. We'll check how the candidates did at the polls, and we'll have a full show then. In the meantime, you can follow our coverage at jsonline.com and, of course, on Twitter with the hashtag JSPolitics. We'll see you next week.